Okay, my name is Tom Tillemans. Some of you may have heard I'm the editor of the Buddhist Literary Heritage Project. So at some point or another in time, translators will be in touch with me, and we'll have an interchange on much more specific matters. But for the moment, I'd like to talk on some questions of methodology and resources. The idea actually came from Gene Smith, our great friend who passed on, who said to me once, "You should do a little tutorial on Sanskrit compounds. That could be useful for these translators and on other questions of, in a sense, underlying Sanskrit." And I had a talk once with Peter Skilling too, and other people, and it's necessary, I think, for a person who's translating to in some way have a bit of a sense of the underlying Sanskrit of the text, even if that Sanskrit no longer exists. There's a sense in which a person translating from the Tibetan still has to be able to look at things a bit with the Sanskritist's eyes, or perhaps even as if the text was a bit of a palimpsest, where the Sanskrit is just barely visible. So I'll deal with a few of those things. Obviously, it's impossible to in this context do a very specific tutorial, but I just want to also tell you a little bit where I'm at, how I approach things. When we had our meetings in Kathmandu with the Buddhist Literary Heritage Project, Sonsai Kensei said a number of interesting things, one of which comes back quite frequently. He said, "We're dealing with three pillars in this project, and they all have their own needs and they all have their own approaches. One is the academic community, a so-called academic approach. The other is the Tibetan community. And the third is the readers and the sponsors, including the Buddhist donors." So everyone has their own interests, their own demands, and it's an interesting and delicate exercise to put all of these together. Sometimes we have, or it's all too easy to make oppositions between, say, a Tibetan approach and an academic approach. I think we want to avoid that. In other words, we really want to take seriously this idea of three pillars, and that they're all valid. So what does that mean in practice? Well, it means a lot of things, and it's a kind of an art. It means that Tibetan lamas, Tibetan oral traditions are certainly to be consulted, are certainly to be used, are certainly to be understood. It means that academic resources, past research, is also to be used. In other words, we shouldn't disregard what's already been done and, in a sense, reinvent the wheel or make the mistakes that other people have long since got past. So I think we're in a situation where we want to use as much of the available resources as we can. That includes academic resources. It includes working with Tibetans. But it also means, I think, that there is no one approach which answers all the questions. There's no kind of little algorithm called methodology which you simply plug in and the appropriate result comes out. We have to be, in a sense, very resourceful. We have to be like detectives in a way, but also have a certain humility, both with regard to the Tibetans and with regard to what's been done by other good scholars. Now, what is academic methodology? People make, especially in PhD theses, they make a big deal of these things. There's a lot of it which is just simply common sense. As I said, it's a matter of using previous research. It's a matter of keeping a historical context. It's a matter of also using the best readings, the best text available. There are obviously, at any stage in this, 100 ways in which one can get bogged down. You can get bogged down in critical editions, you can get bogged down on historical questions, etc. There are all sorts of ways in which you can postpone, in a sense, doing the actual work, and that is one of the negative, well, it's one of the traps that you can get into with, in a sense, an overly academic approach. However, for us, I think the important thing is to have a sense of an understanding of the previous research, an understanding of history, and how the text hangs together. In other words, here's where we come into the idea of underlying Indic structures, underlying Sanskrit structures. Now, how does, again, to speak from an academic point of view, how do you deal with those Indic elements? Basically, I think there are two things that we want to deal with that are important for us. One, there's a question of vocabulary. In other words, we have a whole lot of terms in Tibetan which are actually well-known translations for equivalent Sanskrit or Pali terms. I'll go into that in a bit more detail, but I want to go quite quickly to the second point of what I'm talking about and what I mean by underlying Indic elements. And that's in particular questions of grammar, syntax, and compound words. So let me deal with that first. And then we'll make more general remarks on questions of vocabulary and how one can go about finding that vocabulary, what the resources are, and what's the best method to use. Now, I think we all agree that when you're translating a Tibetan text, there's no point in actually restoring it into